Oh, that's cold.
After recent floodwater had subsided, I was curious to go and have a look at some of the islands in this river which can routinely find themselves beneath up to 6 foot of water. I was pleasantly surprised after wading across to find that it was a relatively decent bit of land, although very stony and bumpy, but with some of these beautiful locations. Unfortunately, it is extremely overlooked by very popular public footpaths. I decided I was going to need some extra camping mats to deal with the bumpy surface, so I went and got some and returned to unbelievably find somebody had lit a fire right on the riverbank where I needed to cross. So I had to abandon that trip because A, I didn't want anybody to know someone was sleeping on the island overnight, and of course B, all of the smoke and fire was a massive alarm bell for anybody in the vicinity that there were people there. You may notice I've got a huge amount of kit here, and that's because after being cold on a previous night, I decided to take a blanket, which took up a huge amount of space. I, of course, needed a change of clothes and shoes and everything else, and I had to have my extra camping mats for the stony surface. Plus, I was wearing all of my layers of clothing for the night as well, including shorts and t-shirts under everything. When I got back to the riverbank, you can see there was actually evidence of many fires that had been lit over very recent days. So I was very glad just to be there in the calm and quiet with nobody around. And as such, I set about crossing the river as soon as I could. You can see at this point we had those sunset colours starting to creep into the sky, and it was really lined up to be an absolutely beautiful evening. You can probably also imagine that this wasn't the warmest moment of my life either, but what a great way to start a trip and start a night out in the wild. This is one of the two great moments of relief of the day, getting the backpack off. The second being what immediately followed, getting out of those wet shoes. Goodness me, it was cold. So within 10 minutes of reaching the river, I was now on the island, I was dry and I was warming back up. I left my wet kit laid out flat on the ground to try and dry off a little bit. It didn't work, in fact it actually froze overnight. Of course, I couldn't hang it up because it would have been a massive flag to the surrounding footpaths, but just look at this for a beautiful scene. The sunset colours reflecting off everything, and the prospect of a lovely clear dark sky to look at the stars later on. So I got the Trangia stove lit. I always love it when I can use a spark to light it. It makes me feel like a real outdoors person. But on a serious note, what better place to sit down and have something to eat, surrounded by the sound of running water, and basically that drowned out every other sound of every other thing. In an ideal world, I would pitch up on this bit of soft grassy knoll here, but that would leave me in direct line of sight of the path that runs along the top of that very small cliff area. So what I might do is pitch up somewhere else earlier on in the evening, and then if I can't get to sleep or if I wake up when it's well beyond any sort of walking time, move on to here. I am planning another extremely early escape at about a 4 a.m. alarm. Well, not about, exactly a 4 a.m. alarm, because not only is it only an hour earlier than I very often set my alarm anyway, but obviously it's going to be a hassle getting across the water, changing me clothes and disappearing out of the potential line of sight of walkers or people working out in the countryside. So before I set up camp, I wanted to make sure that I'd got something nice and warm inside me, and a bit of boiling water and pasta in a cup is always a winner in my book. And you'll see in a minute, I even had a bonus of some cheese and onion breadsticks. Now that is fancy. Look at this is me in my ultimate high society dining situation here. So on a serious note, I wanted to do a little bit of cooking with the Trangia and have something to eat first because, of course, well, it was this light. I didn't want to be setting anything up that was too visible from the footpaths. So these clumps here are actually bits of leaf litter left behind in the trees from when the river has flooded. And bear in mind, I'm not lying, I am absolutely stood up straight here. This is how tall I am, about 5'6", something like that. I know I'm short, but 5'6", and these ones are roughly at my head height, whereas as you can see, some of them must be 7 or 8 feet high. Just imagine how much extra water that is. The width of this part of the river, and it can add an extra 7 foot or so from where I am stood right now. Okay, so what I'm about to say is ridiculous, but I'm tempted. In fact, I'm not just tempted, I'm going to set up my bivvy just on these stones to see just how uncomfortable it'll be. And then I'll move up onto some higher ground later on. But just for a laugh and just for curiosity's sake, I wanted to test it out here. I just want to point out that everything you're seeing from this camera view with the wide-angle lens was filmed in less than 11 minutes, and just watch how dark it goes over that time. Unbelievable. You know what? If I'm lying flat, it's not bad, but as soon as I start to put any sort of angle or pressure points on, I don't know, my backside or my elbows, I can really feel how solid that ground is. Okay, just a little spoiler alert here. Even though it wasn't the most comfortable bed I've ever slept in, when I actually got off to sleep and was not obviously awake to think about how uncomfortable and bumpy it was, I ended up sleeping for an unbroken couple of hours at least, as far as I can tell. My concerns for how exposed this spot was to the public footpaths was not unfounded, and as you can see, the people walking along with torches on those were completely visible and in direct line of sight, so I'm glad that I kept everything to the stealthiest minimum possible point till late on. Okay then friends, it's only 8 o'clock, but I'm going to retire to the bivvy just because there's so much activity going on out there. This is the first time tonight that I've had any artificial light source. Temperature's dropping, it's very chilly. We've had actually a couple of spots of rain, which I do not like. Although luckily I think it's the lightest shower ever and there's not going to be a huge deluge coming down from upstream to wash me away. Okay, honest opinion, this is absolutely awesome. It's definitely not particularly comfortable here on the stones, but it's not as bad as you might think. The main concern is obviously there's a lot of very cold stone beneath me, and there's not much between me and that. Anyway, I'm keeping my head down, I'm going to turn this light off, and I'm just going to enjoy looking up at the stars. And you know what? I did just that. I can't tell you how pleasant this period of the evening was. I tried to get some of these shots as if they were POV shots so that you can see the view straight up here into the starry sky, and of course looking down to the bottom of the bivvy and the surrounding area. Just beautiful. We've got an unbelievable sky, so many stars visible to the naked eye, even with the huge moon up. And as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I can't believe how well the moon is illuminating everything around me. I've been walking around with zero lights, and for maybe the last half hour taking photos of the stars and so on with no problem at all, and it's been absolutely amazing. As I began to think about going to bed properly, the temperature was hovering around 4 or 5 degrees, so I felt like I was safely out of the freezing zone. But as you can see, my breath was clearly visible, and it was definitely chilly down by the water. So brace yourselves for me waking up at 3:30 AM to see ice glistening on my backpack. I don't know if you can tell, but these are literally starting to freeze solid. Literally, like, the crinkles are frozen into them unless I bend them with my hands. You can see it literally folding. It may come as no shock to know that when I saw my boots and my trousers freezing solid, I decided I wasn't going to wait around for the extra half hour or so until my originally planned leaving point, and I was just going to get myself a nice Twix flavoured hot chocolate to see me on my way, and while that was on the boil, get everything packed up. And I'm glad to say that even in the cold temperatures, with that little bit of haste that it fetches into, I don't know, it makes you rush, or it makes me rush a little bit more, I still managed to get everything packed away nice and sensibly and in a timely manner. You may have noticed the Trangia wouldn't light off a spark then, and I believe that's because of the temperature. If you watch that bit back, it actually took a few seconds to light, even from the naked flame of the match. This is my final leave no trace scan of the campsite. So we're aiming roughly for the big tree, and let's just go.
That's so cold. That's so cold. Oh, that's cold. I'm not panicking. I'm not panicking.
I'm sure it's absolutely no surprise to anybody to know that after putting my feet into frozen shoes and then going out in freezing conditions wading into a river, it was very cold, as I repeatedly said in the remainder of that video clip. In hindsight, looking at this footage, this was probably a lot more dangerous than I gave it credit for at the time. Even in the daytime, crossing over a river like that, such shallow water can generate so much force, it's a shock to the system. And especially when you've got such slippy stones beneath the surface. So I certainly wouldn't recommend anybody go out and do this themselves. Also, the fact that I had to come across in freezing conditions, in the darkness, at night, in the small hours when there's nobody out and about, well, that probably wasn't a good idea either. Thank you very much for watching, my friends. I hope you've enjoyed this little trip out. I know that I certainly did. If you'd like to support me, then please consider subscribing, checking out my other videos. If you really want to support me and like what you saw, please consider being a channel supporter, either by becoming a member, a Facebook subscriber, a PayPal supporter, or leaving a super thanks. If it wasn't for my channel supporters, I simply wouldn't have even got my bivvy bag. So thank you very much, everybody, and I will see you again very, very soon. Keep it tent worthy, keep it interesting, have a fantastic day, and of course, farewell.